Welcome to the Life Paradox, where reality is stranger than fiction. Ethan Reed had everything a 20-year-old could want: wealth that stretched back 3 generations, classic good looks that turned heads across campus, and a future as bright as the polished silver spoons he'd been raised with. Princeton University's ivy-covered walls seemed built for people exactly like him, with their perfect pedigrees and limitless potential. But Ethan's world revolved around one person who didn't fit into his parents' vision: Maya Bennett, his girlfriend of 2 years. Maya worked 3 jobs to afford tuition, her worn backpack a stark contrast to Ethan's designer leather. She understood concepts in their shared literature classes that Ethan couldn't grasp, despite his expensive education. When they walked through campus together, she fit against his side like she belonged there, her laughter warming places inside him he never knew existed. "Your parents will never accept me," Maya said one evening as they sat beneath an ancient oak tree, light filtering through leaves onto her face. "You know that, right?" Ethan pulled her closer. "They just need time." But time wasn't on their side. The following weekend, Ethan's father arranged a meeting at the family estate in Connecticut, the sprawling mansion where generations of Reeds had plotted the continuation of their legacy. "The Bennett girl is lovely," his father said carefully, swirling brandy in a crystal glass worth more than Maya's monthly rent. "But be realistic, son. The Ashcroft's daughter will be at the charity gala next month. Elizabeth, remember her? Her father sits on the board with me." "I'm not interested in Elizabeth Ashcroft," Ethan said, though his voice lacked conviction even to his own ears. His mother touched his arm, her diamond bracelet catching the light. "Darling, these college romances are sweet, but temporary. Your father and I are thinking about your future." Every paradox begins with a question. If you love unraveling life's biggest mysteries, hit subscribe and join the Life Paradox, where every story bends reality. The question haunting Ethan was simple yet impossible. Could he choose between the world he was born into and the woman who made that world feel hollow? 3 days later, Ethan sat across from Maya in a quiet cafe off campus. Rain streaked the windows, blurring the world outside. His family's ultimatum echoed in his mind: end things with Maya, or lose access to the trust fund, the connections, the future that had been carved out for him since birth. "Something's wrong," Maya said, sensing the shift in him before he'd spoken a word. "I can't do this anymore," Ethan said, the practiced speech dissolving on his tongue. "We're too different, Maya. We want different things." "That's not true," she whispered, eyes searching his. "That's them talking, not you." But Ethan couldn't meet her gaze. "I'm sorry," he said, placing his house key, the one he'd given her months ago, on the table between them. "This is for the best." Maya stared at the key, then at him, something breaking behind her eyes. "Coward," she said softly, the word cutting deeper than if she'd screamed it. She stood, gathered her things, and walked out of the cafe without looking back. Ethan told himself he'd made the rational choice, the smart choice, the right choice. But as rain soaked through his expensive coat on the long walk back to his empty apartment, he wondered why the right choice felt like ripping out his own heart with bare hands. 7 years passed like turning pages in a book Ethan wasn't particularly interested in reading. He graduated with honors, joined his father's investment firm, and became exactly what was expected of him. His apartment overlooked Central Park. His closet held suits worth more than some people's cars, and his social calendar filled with charity galas and networking events rather than genuine connections. Elizabeth Ashcroft eventually became Elizabeth Reed in a wedding featured in Society. Magazines, 300 guests, none of whom Ethan could claim as true friends. She was beautiful, polished, and perfect on paper. Their conversations never ventured beyond safe topics: vacation properties, market trends, and which private schools their theoretical children would one day attend. On his 28th birthday, Ethan found himself alone on the balcony of his penthouse, Manhattan spread before him like a glittering promise. But promises of what, exactly? He couldn't remember the last time he'd truly laughed, the last time he'd felt anything beyond mild satisfaction or irritation. "Happy birthday, darling," Elizabeth said, joining him with 2 glasses of champagne. "The Morgans just arrived. Don't forget they're considering us for the board position." Ethan accepted the glass and nodded. He'd become very good at nodding. The party inside hummed with expensive laughter and strategic conversations. Ethan moved through it like a ghost, shaking hands, making the right jokes, being the perfect host. Yet, with each passing hour, the feeling grew stronger, that he was merely an actor in a play about his life, rather than actually living it. "Reed," called James Wilson, a colleague from the firm. "Come meet our new legal counsel. Complete genius. Saved us millions on the Westbrook acquisition." Ethan excused himself from a mind-numbing conversation about yacht maintenance and crossed the room. The crowd parted, revealing a woman in a simple black dress, her back to him as she examined a painting on his wall. "Ethan, meet," but as the woman turned, the name James spoke faded into background noise. 7 years disappeared in an instant. Maya. She looked different, hair shorter, posture more confident, dressed in the understated elegance of someone comfortable in their success. But her eyes were the same, widening slightly in recognition before a composed mask slipped into place. "Mr. Reed," she said, extending a hand. "Your firm's reputation precedes you." Ethan took her hand automatically, feeling the jolt of contact, like electricity. "Maya," he said, too quietly for anyone else to hear. "It's actually Maria Bennett now, professionally," she corrected smoothly. "I changed it legally after law school. Less confusion that way." The subtle reminder of their shared past hit like a physical blow. She'd erased even her name, reinventing herself while he'd been busy becoming a carbon copy of his father. "You two know each other?" James asked, looking between them curiously. "Princeton," Maya, Maria, said simply. "Different circles, same campus." The understatement of the decade, Ethan thought. Different circles. As if he hadn't once known the exact pattern of freckles across her shoulders. As if they hadn't once stayed up until dawn arguing about Dostoevsky and planning impossible futures. "Small world," Ethan managed, his perfect host persona failing him spectacularly. "Increasingly so," she replied, something unreadable flashing in her eyes before she turned to answer a question from James about contract details. Across the room, Elizabeth caught his eye, raising an eyebrow in silent question. Ethan gave her a reassuring smile that felt like plastic stretching across his face. Maya, Maria, was here, in his home, successful, brilliant, and looking at him like he was a stranger she'd rather not know better. This, Ethan realized with sinking clarity, was exactly what he deserved. Over the following weeks, Ethan found himself increasingly aware of Maria's presence in the firm. She commanded attention in meetings without raising her voice, her legal analyses cutting through posturing with surgical precision. Partners who had been dismissive of other women in the firm listened when she spoke. Even Ethan's father, notoriously difficult to impress, referred to her as exactly what we needed. Ethan avoided direct interaction when possible, delegating communications through associates. But in a company where their departments necessarily overlapped, collision was inevitable. "Mr. Reed," Maria said, catching him as he attempted to slip out after a budget meeting. "I need your signature on these compliance documents." They stood alone in the conference room, Manhattan's skyline framing them through floor-to-ceiling windows. Ethan accepted the folder, keeping his eyes on the papers rather than on her. "How's Elizabeth?" Maria asked, the polite question carrying weight neither acknowledged. "She's well. Chairing the Children's Hospital fundraiser this year," Ethan replied, signing where indicated. "How about you? Are you married?" The question escaped before he could reconsider its appropriateness. "No," Maria said simply. "My work keeps me busy." Ethan nodded, handing back the folder. Their fingers brushed briefly and he withdrew his hand too quickly. "We're adults, Ethan," Maria said suddenly, her professional veneer cracking slightly. "This awkwardness is unnecessary. What happened was a lifetime ago." Ethan looked at her, then really looked, seeing the strength she'd built since he'd broken her heart. "You're right," he said. "I just wasn't prepared to see you again." "Life rarely sends advance notices for its most important moments," she replied, gathering her materials. "For what it's worth, I'm glad things worked out for you. You got exactly what you wanted." The statement hung between them, neither accusation nor compliment, simply observation. Before Ethan could respond, she was gone, heels clicking purposefully across marble floors. That evening, Ethan sat across from Elizabeth at an overpriced restaurant, watching her examine the wine list with practiced discernment. 7 years of marriage, and he realized he couldn't recall a single genuinely passionate conversation between them. "I ran into someone from college today," he said suddenly. Elizabeth looked up, mildly interested. "Oh, anyone I would know?" "No," Ethan said, the word tasting like regret. "No one you would know." Later that night, unable to sleep, Ethan found himself searching Maria's name online. Bar Association honors, partner at 30, pro bono work for immigrant children. A life of purpose and achievement built entirely without his family's connections or wealth. Elizabeth shifted beside him, murmuring something about checking the Tokyo markets before settling back to sleep. Ethan closed the browser and stared at the ceiling, wondering when exactly he had stopped being a person and become merely a position. Son, husband, executive. Roles performed without feeling. The next morning, Maria stood waiting at his office door. "We need to talk," she said without preamble. "The Lockwood acquisition. There are ethical concerns your team seems determined to ignore." Ethan sighed, motioning her inside. "Close the door." For the next hour, they argued as they once had in college, passionately, intellectually, neither giving ground. It was the most alive Ethan had felt in years. "You used to care about principles," Maria said finally, frustration evident. "What happened to that person?" The question pierced something, long dormant in Ethan's chest. "He made a choice," Ethan said quietly, "and then kept making it, day after day, until it wasn't a choice anymore. Just inertia." Maria's expression softened momentarily before her professional mask returned. "Well, I'm giving you another choice. Now, fix this ethical breach or I'll take it to the board myself." As she turned to leave, Ethan called after her. "Would you have dinner with me? To discuss the case, of course." Maria paused, hand on the doorknob. "That would be inappropriate on multiple levels, and you know it." "Just colleagues discussing work," Ethan pressed. "You have a wife, Ethan," she said, not turning around. "And I have boundaries. Some decisions can't be undone with dinner invitations." The door closed behind her with quiet finality, leaving Ethan alone with the ghost of who he might have been. The Lockwood acquisition became Ethan's obsession. Digging through financial reports late into the night, he discovered Maria was right. His father's team had buried evidence of labor violations and environmental damage. The ethical breach wasn't just concerning, it was potentially criminal. Confronting his father proved as difficult as expected. "This is business, son," the elder Reed said dismissively. "These technicalities get sorted after acquisitions all the time." "Exploiting workers isn't a technicality," Ethan argued. "Neither is dumping chemicals into groundwater." His father's expression hardened. "Since when did you become so righteous? Is this about impressing that Bennett woman? Because I notice you've suddenly found your conscience since she appeared." The accusation stung precisely because it contained elements of truth. Maria's presence had awakened something dormant in him, but the awakening revealed how much of himself he'd surrendered over the years. "This is about doing the right thing," Ethan insisted. "Something I should have remembered how to do long ago." That night, Elizabeth confronted him over dinner. "Your father called. He says you're being difficult about Lockwood." Ethan set down his fork. "There are serious ethical issues with the acquisition." "There are serious financial opportunities, too," Elizabeth countered. "The Ashcrofts have invested heavily. My father expects this deal to close." "People could be harmed," Ethan said. Elizabeth studied him with growing concern. "This isn't like you, Ethan. You've never worried about these details before." The observation hit harder than any criticism could have. She was right. This wasn't like him. At least not the him he'd become. The following day, Maria found a detailed report on her desk. Ethan's comprehensive analysis of the Lockwood problems with proposed solutions that would protect workers and remediate environmental damage without killing the acquisition. "Impressive," she said, appearing in his doorway that afternoon. "But your father will never agree to these terms." "He will if I threaten to vote against it at the board level," Ethan replied. "Between my shares and those, I can block this." Maria leaned against the doorframe. "That would create quite the family rift." "Some rifts already exist," Ethan said. "They're just papered over with politeness and pretense." Something shifted in Maria's expression. Not quite softening, but reassessment. "Why are you really doing this, Ethan?" He considered deflecting but found himself unable to lie to her. "Because you reminded me that I once cared about more than balance sheets. Because doing the right thing shouldn't require courage, but somehow it does in this world we've built." "People change," Maria said carefully. "Sometimes for the better. And sometimes they just remember who they were supposed to be all along," Ethan replied. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the years between them simultaneously vast and non-existent. "Have lunch with me," Ethan said suddenly. "In the company cafeteria. Completely public, completely professional. We need to strategize on this anyway." Maria hesitated, then nodded. 1 hour. Tomorrow at noon. Strictly business." That night, Elizabeth mentioned casually that she would be in Paris the following week for a charity function. "You could join me," she offered without enthusiasm, both knowing he wouldn't. Their marriage had become a series of parallel lives occasionally, intersecting for appearances, neither happy nor unhappy, merely existing alongside each other, like furniture in the same room. As Ethan lay awake that night, he wondered how many more years he could live this half-life before something broke irreparably inside him. The answer came sooner than expected. Lunch with Maria stretched from 1 hour to nearly 3, the cafeteria emptying around them as they dissected the Lockwood situation. For the first time in years, Ethan felt fully engaged, his mind working alongside someone who challenged rather than accommodated him. "You could have done this kind of work all along," Maria observed, gathering her notes. "You have the mind for it." "I was too busy becoming what was expected," Ethan admitted. "The path was so clearly marked I never questioned where it led." Maria's phone buzzed with a message. As she checked it, genuine delight transformed her face. "My sister had her baby," she explained, turning the screen to show him a photo of a newborn. "I'm officially an aunt." Ethan smiled, remembering how Maria had once spoken of her younger sister with fierce protectiveness. "Congratulations. You'll be an amazing aunt. I'm leaving early to go see them," Maria said, standing. "Can we continue this tomorrow?" "Of course," Ethan replied. "Family comes first." The words hung between them, loaded with unintended meaning. Maria's expression turned contemplative. "You know what's strange?" she said quietly. "When you broke things off, you said we wanted different things. But I don't think that was ever true. I think we wanted exactly the same things: connection, purpose, meaning. You just believed you could only find those through the path laid out for you." Before Ethan could respond, she left, leaving him with the uncomfortable weight of her insight. That evening, returning to his empty apartment, Elizabeth already departed for Paris, Ethan found himself opening boxes he'd stored away years ago. College memorabilia, journals, photographs, evidence of a life more authentically lived. In one box, he found a book of poetry with a faded bookmark. Opening to the marked page, he found lines underlined in Maya's handwriting. "For what is it to die but to stand naked in the wind and to melt into the sun? And what is it to cease breathing, but to free the breath from its restless tides, that it may rise and expand and seek God unencumbered?" Beneath it, she'd written, "Some deaths are necessary for rebirth. Some losses open us to greater finding." Ethan closed the book, memories washing over him. They had been so young, so certain they understood profound truths about life. Perhaps they had, before practicality and expectation dulled those understandings. The next day, the confrontation with his father escalated beyond repair. "You're undermining everything this family has built," the elder Reed thundered, slamming his fist on his desk. "For what? Some misguided ethical crusade? Or is this about that Bennett woman?" "Her name is Maria," Ethan said evenly. "And this is about who I am, not who she is." "Who you are," his father scoffed. "Who you are is my son, a Reed. That means something in this world." "It should mean integrity," Ethan countered. "It should mean using our position to do good, not to exploit loopholes and people alike." His father's face reddened dangerously. "If you block this acquisition, there will be consequences, financial ones." The threat hung in the air, the same ultimatum from years ago, threatening to cut Ethan off if he didn't comply. But this time, something had changed. Ethan felt the frightened boy inside him finally grow quiet. "Do what you feel you must," Ethan said calmly. "I'll do the same." Walking out of his father's office, Ethan felt simultaneously terrified and more peaceful than he had in years. In the elevator, he texted Elizabeth, "We need to talk when you return. Some deaths are necessary for rebirth." Elizabeth returned from Paris with a suitcase full of designer purchases and cold fury in her eyes. She'd heard about Ethan's stance on the Lockwood deal through her father. "Have you lost your mind?" she demanded, pacing their living room. "Do you understand what you're risking? Our reputation, our standing, our wealth," Ethan finished quietly. "That's what this is really about, isn't it?" Elizabeth stopped pacing. "Don't be naive. Wealth is what separates us from everyone else. It's what gives us freedom." Ethan laughed without humor. "Freedom? We live in a cage of expectations, Elizabeth. We perform roles rather than live lives. When was the last time either of us did something simply because it brought us joy?" "This philosophical awakening is terribly convenient timing," Elizabeth said coldly. "Right when Maria Bennett returns to your life." "This isn't about Maria," Ethan insisted, though not entirely convincingly. "This is about finally being honest. With myself. And with you." Elizabeth studied him, something shifting in her expression. "You never loved me, did you?" The blunt question caught Ethan off guard with its unexpected vulnerability. "I tried," he said finally. "I thought love was something that would grow from commitment and compatibility. I thought passion was overrated compared to stability. And now?" Elizabeth pressed. "Now I think we've both settled for far less than we deserve," Ethan said gently. "You deserve someone who loves you completely, not someone performing the role of husband." Elizabeth sank onto the sofa, anger giving way to resignation. "I knew when I married you," she admitted. "I saw how you looked at that scholarship girl at Princeton. You never looked at me that way. But I thought it wouldn't matter in the long run." The quiet confession stunned Ethan. "Why would you settle? For that?" "For the same reasons you did. Elizabeth said simply. It was expected. It was practical. It was the path of least resistance. They sat in silence as night fell over Manhattan, two strangers who had shared a bed for 7 years finally, seeing each other clearly. I want a divorce, Elizabeth said finally, not because of your ethical crusade or because of Maria, but because I'm 35 years old and I've never known what it feels like to be truly loved. I think I'd like to find out before it's too late. Relief and guilt flooded Ethan in equal measure. I'm sorry, he said, for not being brave enough to prevent all this years ago. Elizabeth stood, smoothing her skirt with practiced composure. I'll stay with my sister until arrangements can be made. I suggest you prepare yourself. Your father won't take this well, especially combined with your position on Lockwood. After she left, Ethan stood at his window watching lights flicker across the city. For the first time in years, the future seemed unwritten, terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The board meeting on Lockwood was scheduled for the following week. Ethan spent days preparing his case, working alongside Maria to document every ethical breach and propose alternatives. Their professional relationship remained carefully bounded, neither acknowledging the seismic personal shifts occurring in Ethan's life, until Maria appeared at his office door late one evening, clearly troubled. Your father came to see me today, she said without preamble. He offered me a partnership track and a substantial bonus if I would help you see reason about Lockwood. Ethan felt cold anger rise. I'm sorry, that was completely inappropriate. When I declined, he suggested my position here might become untenable if I continued exerting undue influence over you. Maria continued, her voice steady despite the obvious threat. He can't fire you without cause, Ethan said. And you have done nothing wrong professionally, Maria smiled thinly. We both know powerful men rarely need official cause, but that's not why I'm here. Why are you here? Ethan asked quietly. To tell you that whatever happens tomorrow at that board meeting, make sure you're doing it for the right reasons, Maria said. Not to impress me, not to defy your father, but because it's what you truly believe is right. With that, she turned to leave, but Ethan called after her. Elizabeth and I are getting divorced. Maria paused, not turning around. I'm sorry to hear that, she said carefully. Are you? Ethan asked. Now she did turn, her expression unreadable. Marriage's ending is always sad, Ethan, even ones that perhaps shouldn't have begun. She left him standing alone with that truth and all its implications hanging in the air between them. The boardroom hummed with tension as directors filed in, taking their places around the polished mahogany table. Ethan's father sat at the head, his expression carved from stone as he deliberately avoided his son's gaze. Elizabeth's father, Harold Ashcroft, whispered with other board members, occasionally glancing coldly in Ethan's direction. News of the impending divorce had spread quickly through their social circle. Combined with Ethan's opposition to the Lockwood deal, it created the perfect storm of personal and professional rebellion. Maria entered last, taking a seat against the wall with other senior counsel, her composure absolute despite the charged atmosphere. Before we begin formal proceedings, Ethan's father announced, I'd like to note that my son has recused himself from the Lockwood vote due to a conflict of interest. Ethan straightened. I've done nothing of the sort. Given your personal situation and obvious distractions, his father continued smoothly, the executive committee felt it prudent to relieve you of this particular responsibility. The calculated move shouldn't have surprised Ethan, yet somehow it did. He had underestimated how far his father would go to maintain control. You can't unilaterally remove a board member's voting rights, Ethan said, keeping his voice steady, as he opened his leather portfolio. As you'll see in the bylaws, Section 4, Paragraph 8. Several board members shifted uncomfortably as Ethan distributed documents. What I've provided is evidence of serious ethical and legal violations. In the Lockwood acquisition target, Ethan continued, Violations that expose this firm to substantial liability and reputational damage. Harold Ashcroft scoffed. These are minor regulatory issues that can be addressed post-acquisition. Child labor in Malaysian factories is not a minor regulatory issue, Ethan countered. Neither is groundwater contamination affecting 3 rural communities. For the next hour, Ethan methodically presented his case, referring to documentation Maria had helped compile. Though he never explicitly mentioned her involvement, her influence was evident in the legal framework of his arguments. "What exactly are you proposing?" asked Catherine Winters, the board's most independent voice. "Conditional acquisition," Ethan replied. "We require Lockwood to remediate environmental damage and implement labor reforms before closing, with binding commitments for ongoing compliance. That would delay closing by months, possibly a year," his father objected. "The share price might temporarily dip," Ethan finished. "But consider the alternative: class action lawsuits, regulatory penalties, and public relations damage when these issues inevitably come to light. Short-term thinking created these problems at Lockwood. Let's not compound them with our own short-term decisions." Catherine nodded slowly, other board members looking thoughtful. Ethan's father recognized the shifting mood. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately," he suggested, eyeing his son coldly. "Clear the room of non-voting attendees." Maria stood with other staff members heading for the door. As she passed behind Ethan's chair, she paused briefly, her hand lightly touching his shoulder. So quickly it might have been imagined, yet unmistakable in its meaning. Solidarity. The hours that followed were brutal. Accusations of disloyalty, emotional manipulation, and professional incompetence flew across the table. Harold Ashcroft suggested Ethan's judgment was compromised by his failing marriage. Another board member questioned whether personal infatuations were clouding his analysis. Through it all, Ethan maintained his position with a calm certainty that came from finally standing on solid moral ground. When the vote finally came, Ethan held his breath. Catherine Winters voted first, supporting his conditional acquisition plan. 3 more directors followed her lead. With his own vote, that made 5, a slim majority. His father's face remained impassive, but his white-knuckled grip on his pen revealed his fury. "The board accepts the conditional acquisition plan," he announced flatly. Meeting adjourned. As directors filed out, Ethan's father remained seated. "Stay," he commanded when Ethan stood to leave. When they were alone, the elder Reed spoke with quiet intensity. "You've made your point. You've embarrassed me professionally and Elizabeth personally. I hope whatever you're trying to prove was worth destroying everything we've built." "I haven't destroyed anything," Ethan replied. "I've remembered what matters. What should have mattered all along." His father shook his head. "Is she worth it? This grand gesture to win back a woman you abandoned years ago?" "This wasn't for her," Ethan said, surprised to realize the truth of it. "This was for me, for the person I want to be, regardless of whether she's in my life or not." Outside the boardroom, Maria waited in the hallway. "Congratulations," she said simply. "You did the right thing." "We did," Ethan corrected. "I couldn't have built this case without you." Maria nodded, professional pride evident. "What happens now?" The question contained worlds beyond the Lockwood acquisition. "I don't know," Ethan admitted. "For the first time in my life, I don't have a predetermined path. It's terrifying and exhilarating." Maria smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. Fear and exhilaration often look similar from the inside. Maybe that's why people confuse them. As they walked toward the elevator together, Ethan felt lighter than he had in years, despite the uncertainty ahead. Sometimes the heaviest burden was pretending to be someone he was not. 1 year later, Central Park bloomed with spring, cherry blossoms drifting like snow across pathways where joggers and tourists mingled in the warm afternoon. Ethan sat on a bench, watching children sail toy boats across the pond. a simple pleasure he would have once been too busy to notice. The year had transformed him in ways both visible and invisible. He'd left his father's firm, using his portion of the family wealth to establish a foundation focused on corporate ethics and environmental remediation. The irony wasn't lost on him, using Reed money to hold companies like Reed Investments accountable. His relationship with his parents remained strained but not severed. His mother occasionally joined him for lunch, curious about his new life while simultaneously bewildered by his choices. His father maintained professional distance, though Ethan had heard through industry contacts that Reed Investments had quietly implemented more rigorous ethical standards in recent acquisitions. Elizabeth had remarried quickly, a French hotelier she'd met during her stay in Paris. The society pages hinted at genuine happiness, something their marriage had never provided either of them. Ethan checked his watch. He was early for his meeting with the foundation's newest board member, a wise legal expert in corporate accountability who had finally agreed to join after months of persuasion. "Making sure I'm not late?" Maria asked, appearing beside his bench. Ethan smiled up at her. "Just enjoying the view." She sat beside him, closer than professional courtesy required, but not quite close enough to suggest intimacy. Their relationship, over the past year, had evolved cautiously, rebuilding trust through professional collaboration before slowly rediscovering personal connection. "I brought the draft for the Westinghouse proposal," Maria said, opening her bag, "though I'm not convinced this is an appropriate setting for review." "Probably not," Ethan agreed, "but this bench happens to be significant." Maria looked around, recognition dawning slowly. "Princeton," she said softly. "The bench near the fountain where you first asked me out." Ethan nodded. "I was terrified. You were so brilliant in our comparative literature seminar. I was sure you'd see through me immediately, the rich kid playing at intellectualism." "You weren't playing," Maria corrected. "You just didn't trust your own mind back then. You let others define your worth." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the play of light through new leaves. "Why did you agree to join the foundation board?" Ethan asked finally. "You turned me down 3 times before." Maria considered her answer carefully. "I needed to be certain." "Of what?" "That this was real," she said simply. "Your transformation, your commitment, that it wasn't elaborate penance or worse, an extended strategy to win me back." Ethan nodded slowly. "And what convinced you?" "Time," Maria said. "Watching you maintain your principles even when I wasn't there to see it. Hearing from others. How you've changed the conversation around corporate responsibility in circles that once dismissed such concerns." She turned to face him fully, and realizing that I needed to be certain about myself too, that my interest in you now isn't just unresolved history or vindication for past hurts. "And what did you conclude?" Ethan asked, heart pounding as though he were 20 again, sitting beside her for the first time. "That we're different people now," Maria said. "Better versions of who we were. That the timing was wrong then, but perhaps—" She let the thought hang unfinished between them. Ethan took a breath. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. "Not what you're thinking," he added quickly, seeing her expression. "We're not there yet. Maybe someday, but not yet." He handed her a small wrapped package. Maria opened it carefully to reveal a vintage copy of the poetry book she had marked years ago, the same edition he had found in his stored belongings. "How did you find this?" she asked, running her fingers over the worn cover. "Antiquarian? Bookshop in Boston," Ethan said. "Took months to locate this specific edition." Maria opened to the page she had marked all those years ago, finding the lines about necessary deaths and rebirths. "You remembered." "Some things stay with you," Ethan said quietly. "Some people change you forever, even in absence." Maria closed the book, her fingers intertwined with his on the bench between them. Not quite the passionate reunion of movie endings, but something perhaps more valuable. A second chance built on growth rather than regret, on who they had become rather than who they had been. "I can't promise anything," Maria said honestly. "We have a lot of history to navigate." "I'm not asking for promises," Ethan replied. "Just possibility." Above them, cherry blossoms continued their gentle descent, covering the path before them, in pale pink, nature's reminder that beauty often follows surrender, that letting go creates space for new growth. "Possibility," Maria echoed, a smile touching her lips. "I think I can work with that." They sat together as afternoon mellowed toward evening, talking about work and dreams and the intricate patterns of their separate journeys that had somehow led them back to each other. No declarations of undying love, no dramatic promises, just two people rediscovering connection with eyes wide open to both possibility and challenge. As darkness began to fall, they walked together through the park, their shoulders occasionally brushing, each contact a small acknowledgement of the current flowing between them. "There's a fundraising gala next week for the foundation," Ethan said casually as they neared the street. "Would you consider being my guest? Officially as our newest board member, of course." "Of course," Maria replied, her tone gently mocking. The pretense. Very professional. "Absolutely," Ethan agreed with equal playfulness. "Completely above board." Maria stopped walking, turning to face him with sudden seriousness. "If we do this, whatever this becomes, we do it right this time. No hiding, no pretending, no choices made from fear." "No more paths of least resistance," Ethan promised. "Only paths we choose deliberately, together or apart." Maria nodded, satisfied. "Then yes, I'll be your guest at the gala, both as your newest board member and as whatever we're becoming," Ethan finished for her. Later that night, alone, in his apartment, smaller than his previous penthouse but somehow containing more life, Ethan stood at the window watching the city lights. The view wasn't as spectacular as from his old home, but he saw it differently now. Not as a testament to wealth and power, but as countless lives interconnected, each light representing stories unfolding, choices being made, paths converging and diverging. He thought about the terrified 20-year-old who had broken Maya's heart because he couldn't imagine a life outside prescribed boundaries. He thought about the empty success that had followed, the awakening that Maria's return had triggered, and the uncertain but exhilarating future now unfolding before him. Some journeys weren't about arriving at destinations, but about becoming the person strong enough to walk them. Some loves weren't about passion or convenience, but about seeing oneself clearly through another's eyes and finding the courage to become more fully human in that reflection. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. His father's continued disapproval, the foundation's uphill battle against corporate interests, the careful navigation of building something new with Maria without repeating old mistakes. But for the first time in his life, Ethan wasn't trying to control the outcome or follow someone else's map. He was simply walking his own path, one step at a time, with open eyes and an open heart, finally understanding that the greatest wealth was the courage to live authentically, and the greatest love was one that freed rather than confined.